Welcome everybody to the Inner Carnivore Podcast. My guest today, Issy Watson. Before I get in it with Issy, whether you guys are streaming this on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, iTunes, or watching the full video on YouTube, do a huge favor, like the show, subscribe, leave a review, share it with a friend. It helps more than you guys know, and I appreciate it every single time that you guys do it. So jumping right in, how are you doing, Issy?
Not too bad. It's nice weather out finally, so brightens the mood. How are you?
I'm doing well. And being from kind of that area, the Pacific Northwest, I understand the nice weather thing. I don't get it
Yes.
anymore because it's sunshine like 400 days a year here, but it definitely is a mood changer when the sun is out and it's nice up there.
Yeah, it takes forever to become summer here. Like we just probably got it a week ago. So, but yeah, definitely can tell the mood is a bit higher, which is awesome.
For sure. So, for anybody who doesn't know, you are actually a Guinness World Record holder, are you not?
I am. Yeah. A lot of people don't know that, because I actually don't really go around sharing it that much. This was coming up on 3 years ago. I did the most burpees in 1 hour for females, and it was like chest to ground burpees. So at the bottom, like you had to like splue your arms out and then jump back up. Standards were pretty strict, but I did 829 in 1 hour. So I beat the record probably by like 75 reps, maybe. Yeah.
So, like, I have so many questions because, without a doubt, burpees are probably like my least favorite. I can probably count on one hand how many burpees I've done in my life, right? Like, in 1 hour, you did 10 times more burpees than I've ever done in my entire life.
Yes.
So, first of all, like, what prompted even the idea that you were going to go for this record?
Well, yeah, originally I'm from the east part of Canada. So when I moved out west during COVID about 3.5 years ago, I knew some people from the area that I grew up from, kind of. Um, the male did it, and then there was also a female that did it in the area that I went to school in. So then during COVID, it was just like kind of in the back of my mind the whole time. I'm like, oh, I kind of need a goal, right? Like you don't need to go anywhere to do burpees. It's just your body weight. And then when I moved, I was like, well, I don't really know anybody yet. So what better way to kind of just attempt a Guinness World Record? So it's a very long process when you don't get like a judge to come see you. So you have to like submit your request to do it, which takes about 3 months. And then once you get the approval, then you have to do the attempt, record it, get witness statements. Just it's insane. And then you got to upload it. So eventually, after all that, it took probably 6 months to actually become official because of all the evidence review. But yeah, basically, it's just because I grew up doing CrossFit, and burpees are obviously a huge part of CrossFit. So I was like, just go for it.
That, like, I'm doing the math on that, and that's almost
Yeah.
15 burpees a minute.
Yeah, it's about 14 to 15. Yeah. Yeah.
That, like, I still can't, like, it's this. This is my favorite. So, like, I have nothing against CrossFit, but being in the Pacific Northwest when CrossFit really started being, a big thing, there was so many CrossFit gyms that popped up. Like, boutique fitness in especially like Southwest Washington, Portland area is like massive, right? Like it's trendy, it's going against the trend. And so I used to make fun of CrossFit, right? And I always used to be like, I'm going to be the best at working out. Like, I'm going to
Yeah.
be, that's literally all I can think about is like, I'm just like so many burpees. But what's
Yeah,
even
I
more,
mean,
but,
yeah, you go ahead.
but like, what's even more impressive with it is so that's obviously athlete status, right? That's obviously like a very athletic thing to do. And you eat keto carnivore, right? Which most
Yeah.
people can't equate to. So how did you start keto carnivore and how has that affected all of these things that you do?
Yeah, so actually when I did that record, I was eating like I've always eaten healthy. At that time, I was eating, the typical athlete kind of diet, like, sweet potatoes, like mostly buckwheat because I couldn't tolerate oatmeal. But I've always had kind of like some autoimmune issues that, like always affected my performance, right? Because I would have stomach issues and couldn't digest food well. So then, honestly, a couple months after I did that, I was like, I've kind of had enough. Like I'm almost in tears all the time because of my stomach pains. So that New Year, I actually read Paul Saladino's book. And then, so I guess this was the beginning of 2020, which would be the January I started. I was probably rocking around like 50 grams of carbs, but mostly from maple syrup and honey. And then I'm not gonna lie, it did take me a while to fully switch over, right? Like I had the digestive issues, I had low energy, but then probably not until last year it finally just clicked. And I was like, this is great, right? Like obviously I don't have that like quick powerful output, but I can go for hours and hours and just like I used to get like exercise induced like hypoglycemia, right? Where you just get shaky and your world's like spinning. So then once I started the high fat, that hasn't been an issue once. So that's mainly how I got into it. I was really skeptical in the beginning and nervous. Like took me everything I had to just be like, okay, eliminate all carbs, right? Like it was kind of unheard of to me. And then once I did, I didn't want to go back. So
What would you say have been the biggest? I mean, obviously the digestive stuff, right? But what have been the biggest changes from eating how you were to eating how you are now?
yeah, I do still have some struggles every day, right? But the biggest difference is I don't get that like extreme bloating to the point where I just like can't even function, right? Like I would just be, the gut brain connection, my mood would just totally just drop. I would feel really emotional. I would just kind of dread my next meal. And now it's just like the mental clarity. I get excited more to work out. It's just like there's something weird about carbs is like you feel like you have to earn them, right? So it's like if I have a bad workout, I still go home and like eat meat and fat, right? Because I know it's doing something for me. Whereas like if I had a bad workout in the past, I might just go home and be like, I didn't earn my food, right? So I think that's the biggest difference is like the mental change. And actually also the physical too, like my recovery is so much better. I don't wake up like totally sore. It's just, yeah, it's really interesting. And I'm glad I made the switch, definitely.
And what kind of, because I see you training for a lot of stuff right now. What
Yeah.
are the physical endeavors that you are undertaking at the moment while eating this way?
Yeah, like it'd been a while since I actually had a goal because I did get really sick about a year and a half ago. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of like C. diff, stands for colostrum difficile. It's a really bad
Okay.
toxin in your gut. So after that, it took a long time to kind of get my weight back up. I still trained, but then finally this year I was like, I've always wanted to do an Ironman. Like it's the biggest achievement I've ever wanted to do before I die. And I was like, what better way to kind of celebrate my 25th year in life? Doing an Ironman. So I set out starting to train for that. And I did do some more research on like, can you kind of do this on carnivore and keto? And I saw like I listen to Anthony Chafee all the time, so I was like, yeah, why not? Like I'm gonna show others that I can do it and prove all the high carb eaters that it is possible. So yeah, I originally planned out to do that, and then I got this wild opportunity to do a 50-mile ultra marathon in Texas, with a company I've been following for a while. Training kind of switched to that. Um, got like a coach for the ultra. and I still stuck to mostly carnivore, except closer to the race, I added in some more maple syrup and white rice, just from like her recommendations. But I definitely believe I could have done it like full carnivore. Still going up for the Ironman now, but yeah.
So how did you feel during the ultra? Because 50 miles is insane. Again, like I love to work out, right? But I don't do cardio. I don't run.
Yeah.
I mean, 50 miles literally is more than I've ever ran in my entire life. Like,
Yeah.
combined. That's not my thing, right? How did the way you're eating now play into, because obviously you probably ran before, right? Like you didn't just decide, hey, I'm going to start running right now.
Yeah.
How's the comparison between doing it mostly on a carnivore and doing it, eating your typical athlete diet?
Yeah, definitely. I actually, like, I grew up playing lacrosse competitively, was going to go on a scholarship, but that's when I got more like into fitness and stuff. So I have grown up my whole life like running. I would always just kind of casually run like 10Ks here and there. Well, it's all relative. But yeah, and then I remember actually an exact day this was 2 summers ago when it was my first summer eating that way. And I actually like had the fastest, probably 10K maybe it was. And I was like full on carnivore. And I remember I was like so hyped. I was like, I reached out to Sean Baker. I was like, this is wild, right? So I just felt like it was like I didn't get shaky. I could keep going. Like I was going at a fast pace, obviously, because I PR'd, right? I don't know like what made the switch, but it just felt amazing. And ever since then, I can just roll out of bed. I don't have to eat before I go for a run. I can trust that my body's going to use the fat from the previous day stored in my body to fuel me through that run. And even after the run, I'm not even hungry. So I know I need to eat to refuel, but it's the mental part too that just feels so much clearer when I'm running. But yeah, that ultra, either way, it was hard. It was strictly overnight in Texas, and I've probably done like one overnighter in my whole life, which was kind of just when I got sick. So it was wild. I did run with a broken foot, and I sprained my knee throughout, so that was the most painful thing I've ever done in my life, but I fueled really well, and I strongly believe the fat carried me through. Otherwise, I probably would have bonked if this was like 3 years ago.
It's a crazy like give and take, right? So I was a college athlete. I played college baseball. Not something that you need like your super high VO2 max, but it's an extended period of time, especially in college. You play a lot of double headers. And so you have, you're at the field for 8 hours, right? Like between showing up and especially if it's a home game. And so I just remember constantly eating, right? Like I would constantly eat throughout the game. Eat before the game, or eat before you show up, right? Eat right before the game, eat during the game, eat in between games, eat during the second game, eat after the game. And that was just normal, right? Like, and as much as people want to talk about athletes' diets, 99% of athletes eat like garbage. Like if we're actually talking like from a healthy nutrition standpoint, athletes eat like garbage. Why? Because the average age of professional athletes is like 25 years old. Right? Most 25-year-olds can get away with doing whatever they want. Like 25-year-olds can go out and party the night before, get drunk, wake up with a hangover, knock back an energy drink, take some aspirin, and go back out and play just fine. Yeah. That's just what an athlete does, because at some point an athlete has to have some sort of physical ability that most people don't. And so it's like, basically like the way I view nutrition, and I had a sports medicine degree. Like I was in school for sports medicine while eating garbage. Like I ate McDonald's before every game. Right? Like I had one good game. It was a superstitious thing, right? I had one good game after eating McDonald's because I was running late. And then I was like, shh. And literally for the next 2 years, the next 2 years of my career, I ate McDonald's before every single game.
Yeah.
Right. So health was not my main focus. Right. and even in like a science, the medicine field, major. But I hear these people who go, show me an athlete that eats this way, or show me a high level athlete, or show me this, or show me that. And my response is, well, you have to look at the people that you're talking to, right? Like everybody outside of those who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year have a life, right? Minor league baseball players have to have jobs in the off season because they don't make enough money, right? G League basketball players don't make very much money. People who are playing like off-brand football don't make very much money. Most track athletes don't make very much money. Like you all have to have lives. And so to sacrifice your life just so you can perform marginally better, maybe you'll perform marginally better is just absolutely wild to me.
Yeah. And like now that you bring that up, like, yeah, I grew up playing hockey and lacrosse. So we'd have back to back, sometimes 3 games in one day on the weekend. It's just like, oh, team's ordering Subway. Like, what do you guys want? Right. And then, yeah, you're always eating. You have Gatorade on the sidelines, right? Whereas like you obviously don't know at that age. You just kind of do it. But then, why are you so tired the next day? Right? Because you don't have the protein or the proper fat to recover. And yeah, like, I mean, I would never think about it. I would have McDonald's the odd time, probably before I was like 10 playing hockey. And it's always like, oh, pasta before a game, right? But like when I think back then versus now, like I wish I knew what I know now, right? Like I feel like I could have avoided so many injuries and just been a better athlete, even though I was already like a very good athlete. So yeah, it's quite changed my view. So
And I'm glad you brought up how long it took you, because I think it's a downfall for people who are like, well, show me a study, or I tried it, or I know somebody that tried it, because it really does. The average person can maybe in a couple weeks become fat adapted, right? And then they feel fine. But from a performance standpoint, it can take a long time, right? And that's obviously a consideration, but that's tough to get an athlete who has done, right? Anybody who's a high level athlete has succeeded their entire life, right? Like nobody was terrible when they were little, terrible in junior high, terrible in high school, and then all of a sudden got to college and now they're great, right?
yeah,
So as an athlete, and I'm sure you can draw back on this as well, you just do what you've been doing, right? You're trying to improve, but you rely on the stuff that you've been doing that got you there. And to convince somebody who's been eating a certain way, like I said, most athletes, as they're growing, the only consideration is getting enough food.
yeah,
Like that's the only thing people care about, is that you eat enough, right? And they're like, don't eat cake, all day long, but they're like,
yeah.
just make sure you get enough calories. That's
And your
it.
parents are kind of doing the best they can, just like you're so active, like here, eat this, you just got to go to the next practice, you got to go to school. So it's tough that way too. But yeah,
Yeah, so it's difficult to convince somebody to then, spend 6 months altering their diet to see how it works for them, right? And it's, I love seeing these athletes like yourself, Zach Bitters. I had the keto marathoner.
yep,
His episode will actually drop next week. For anybody who didn't listen to the episode or doesn't know, he ran 5 fasted marathons in 5 days, which is wild. Like that's the most insane thing I've ever heard. And then there's the low carb runner and all of these people who are showing. Ryan Talbot, he's a decathlete, collegiate decathlete, who's carnivore. All these people that if you actually do it, you can actually find really good success and benefit outside of athletics as well.
yeah. And the thing I find too is like, especially getting into the longer endurance stuff, like I am in the gym probably more than I am doing endurance, but like doing that endurance, it's just, I see a lot of like triathletes and runners, like they're constantly fueling like every 30 minutes, right? It's like it's just more stress on your body trying to digest that, even if it's faster carbs. Your mental stress because you're thinking, oh, I have to fuel, right? It's like from an exercise science standpoint, if you're at a lower intensity, you're using mainly fat as fuel, right? Because I did kinesiology, so I'm very fascinated by it all, but I just wish more people kind of knew and even just for a couple months, like took the risk and experimented. Like it's not going to kill you, right? Like for me, it took me a couple months, but it totally changed my entire life. So yeah, I just wish people could take more risks that way.
Yeah, and it to your point, and for people who haven't really studied it, it's a very small window that you can no longer use fat and you have to use carbs, right? Like people have this idea that in the gym, right, you have to use, glycogen, you have to use carbohydrates, you have to use glucose. That's the only way to fuel. I'm like, man, like elite runners specifically train to increase their fat oxidation. Like every elite runner knows. They just, have this misconception that I then also need to have all of these carbohydrates. When in reality, if you look at, the rates of, there's a crossover point, right? Like the rate of fat oxidation and the rate of carbohydrate oxidation. And it's like almost 80% of your VO2 max.
Yeah, I was going to say like 70, 75. Yeah.
For, and it that varies, right? Obviously. But for people who don't exercise that much, 99.9% of people will never hit 80% of their VO2 max. Yeah. And if they do, it's because their VO2 max is so low that they hit that going up the stairs, right? Yes. Like, I can honestly say I've hit my VO2 max like very minimal in my entire life, right? Because it's just not what I do. I don't really have any interest in doing that. And so when you look at it from that standpoint, like most marathon runners, they're like 60 to 70, right? Like they might, some, might hit it towards the end. But for the most part, you're talking about like cyclists doing stages in the Tour de France for hours on end, right? Now, if you want to come to me and say, hey, I'm an elite cyclist and I'm trying to win the Tour de France and I need to eat carbs, okay, right? I might not argue with you, but almost every other situation, outside of trying to, win an Olympic gold and your tenths of a second is what's determining it. If people would just play around, like you said, experiment with fat oxidation, like I think they would be amazed.
Yeah, and like it's all different. Like there's a time and place for the carbohydrates, like I believe as well. But it's like, yeah, the everyday, even like people like at my level or your level, it's like you're still not the top of the top elite, right? Like if you feel like your body physically feels better, you mentally feel better, then why are you forcing the carbs into you, right? Like stick to what you feel best with, because after all, like you only have your body, right? So if you're miserable every day just because you're following everybody else that's saying you need carbs to perform better, then it's just, you're not going to enjoy what you're doing. So
how have you felt doing your Ironman training?
I felt very good. Like as an example, like swimming is very tough for me. So I've been consistently in the pool for probably 2 or 3 times since last October. But years ago when I first started swimming, this was like when I was in high school, I would only be able to last like 25 minutes before I got extremely shaky and had to just get out of the pool. Now I go to the pool, like for example, yesterday I had some MCT oil, went to the pool, swam like 75 minutes without feeling hungry, without getting shaky. And then I trust my body that I'm using the fat. And then I come home and refuel. I don't need the extra carbs. Like you might not notice it in the moment, like how your diet's affecting you. But then when you look back to say instances like that, I'm like, wow, like I would not have been able to do that before. So
yeah,
running, I'm not running right now because I did break my foot. But even same with biking, it's the exact same as swimming. It's lower intensity. unless you're doing these high, crazy output intervals, which is, like 10% of your training. But, I feel great.
Have you experimented? So I watched a clip from Keto Pro, who's a bodybuilder and coach in the UK. And he was explaining, there is a way you can basically double dip, right? Like, so you get fully fat adapted, you're running on fat, your fat oxidation for your energy. And then you can introduce carbs in kind of quick hit instances, acute circumstances, and give your body both, right? Have you ever experimented with that? And if so, like what has been the results from that?
Yeah, so usually my training sessions, the past year, I don't usually go, like endurance wise, I don't usually go above like 75 minutes, an hour and a half. But for the ultra, I did use carbs. So I fueled the way I normally do, carnivore. 2 days up to the race, I added, or more like a day and a half actually. I added like organic white rice, maple syrup, molasses, like blackstrap, and I honestly think that's it because I cannot tolerate fruit to save my life. So during the ultra, every hour I would take in about 30 grams of carbs, mostly from maple syrup and the white rice. But I also did have a lot of MCT oil too. And I think it was just more because when you're actually doing the race, you are pushing more towards that upper limit, closer to your max output. So you kind of, I'm not saying you do need the carbs, but it kind of helps you just mentally stay a bit sharper, faster digesting, because like I probably burn close to like 4,000 calories just overnight, right? So it'd be hard if I was just eating blocks of tallow, right? Like I did munch on the carnivore bar quite a bit, but MCT oil as well. If you do too much, your stomach's like, okay, slow down. But I did find it mentally did help me stay sharp, and I believe it did help me physically. At the same time, yeah, I probably could have done it on carnivore, but at the same time, I didn't want to make it harder on my body because I already have some health issues, right? I don't want to like totally burn my whole system out. So I do think you can introduce them strategically, and there's nothing wrong.
That's actually something I want to play around with because when I did my 4,000 calories of standard American diet experiment, right, where I just for 3 weeks I ate 4,000 calories of the worst garbage food you could imagine, and I would have these moments, and it's crazy because going from carnivore to this, like you start to recognize how the food was affecting you in the past, right? Like the roller coasters, especially, right? Like I would eat, right before workout, and then I would feel on top of the world, right? I'd be like,
Yeah.
and it didn't necessarily translate to better endurance or more strength or better performance, but I felt like I just took an energy shot, or like a 5-hour energy, right? Like I felt like I just took it. And then towards the end of the workout, I would be like not depressed, right? Like I'm not trying to like do a mental, type thing, but you would just have this lull, right? Like where you feel yourself crashing. I'm like, man, I remember those days, right? Like I remember those days where 3 o'clock in the afternoon hits, and you're just like, I don't feel like doing anything. And I'm like, man, like I don't miss that at all. Like that's when people ask, they're like, you can't eat this, you can't. I'm like, no, I choose not to, right? I choose not to because I don't like that. As soon as I become not fat adapted, as soon as I'm now relying on carbs and I have to eat every couple of hours and I have to strategically eat before I work out and I have to eat afterwards, or I get like same thing, right? That shaky, which is what I would get. Like that's miserable. I hate that. Right? I've snacked so far. It's 11 o'clock right now, and I've had like a couple snacks so far today. Like, and if I don't eat for the next 2 hours, I'll be totally fine. And so, I kind of do want to play around with, some strategic carb loading to see if I can get the best of both worlds. But that's strictly from what is the maximum that I can get out? But if I even think that I'm close to getting out of fat adaptation, I'll give it up completely.
Yeah, like before my race, I was still only at like the 2 days before, like 100 grams of carbs. Like I'm a smaller athlete, so it's not like I need to push up to like 200. And like if I believe like, like the way you eat while training is the same way you're going to eat while racing, right? Like I'm not going to totally throw my system out of whack because I'm also doing something crazy, challenging that I've never done before. So I don't want to be throwing too much unknown stress at me. But yeah, same thing. Like, say 4 years ago, I was constantly thinking about food, right? Because I was just like so focused on my goals and training that, you wake up and have to eat before I work out. And then, like, yeah, every 2 hours, you would just be like, I have to eat. You get that instant shakiness. And it's like, even though I was eating healthy, it's like, I'm just tired of that. Whereas, like, now I'll be like, I'm okay if I don't eat for 4 hours, right? Like, I'm still not shaky. I might feel like a little bit of hunger, but I never get those shakes, right? It's like, it's just insane when I like comparing the two, going back to when I was a bit younger to now. And that's what I don't miss. It's like, I love the food I'm eating. I wish I could add a bit more variety just because I have some food intolerances, but I don't crave anything sweet. Like, I don't want any of it.
It's something that people don't understand, right? So I created a bit of a stir on TikTok with a video I did on the carnivore bar.
Yes, I saw that.
Totally fine on every platform. TikTok lost their minds.
Oh,
Like, I have legit about 6,000 hate comments on that video. Like, bad. And I had like people finding my email and emailing me and but that is a huge consideration because the bar that he reviewed was the honey bar. And I've had that a couple times. And as someone that doesn't, I'm not going to talk about trace carbs, right? Like if we want to talk about trace carbs, there's carbs in everything, right? But if I'm going off a nutritional label, I eat zero carbs.
yeah.
Like I 95% of the time I have a meal of ground beef, I have a meal of steak, and I eat cheese. And that's it. Right? So I don't intake any carbs. When I eat the honey bar, that thing tastes like pure candy to me.
Yeah.
Right? There's like 7 grams of carbs in that bar for 400 calories. It's like 7 grams. And I'm like, this thing tastes like pure sugar to me. And it's sweet and it's good and I love it. And the guy who reviewed it spit it out. Right? And I'm like, it literally just illustrates how your tastes change. And people need to understand. They're like, I could never give up XYZ. I can never give up fruit. I can never give up sweets. Trust me, I love it. Like, I love fruit. I love cheesecake, right? There's lots of these things that I love that I don't crave anymore. Once I kicked it, because I was animal based for a while, to start.
Me too, yeah.
Once I kicked fruit, I thought I was going to miss it too much. And I literally didn't. I'm like, I am totally fine. Because as you said, like, I don't think about food. Right? Like if I'm thinking about food, it's probably like what recipe or like reel I'm going to make next. That's 90% of the thought process I put into food.
Yeah.
And it's completely liberating, to be 100% honest.
Yeah, I forgot I was going to say something, but yeah, oh, that's what I was going to say. Like during the ultra, I heard like when you run like races like that, you get severe palate fatigue. I'm not kidding. Like 2 hours in, I was like, I cannot have maple syrup ever again in my life. It was just so sweet. I was like, I just need like white rice. And then eventually I was just craving ground beef. And I'm like, like the thing is like when you crave, say, the beef or the steak, it's like that's what your body wants, right? So yeah, carbs are tough because you do become sensitized to it. So you're going to need more and more to get that same taste. which I found just by introducing them for the ultra. And then I go back to it, I'm like, I could just kind of puke. It's so sweet.
Yeah, and people would ask me, right? So I'm doing the 4K SAT experiment, and I'm eating like Twinkies and Ding Dongs and Pop Tarts, and so many people would be like, "You low key like it a little bit, don't you?" I'm like, honestly, no, right?
Yeah.
Like a couple years ago, had I had a couple days where I did that, sure, right? But after, like, even as soon as I started eating it, this just doesn't. A, it doesn't taste good anymore. And B, I can tell this is doing nothing for me. Right? Like I honestly feel I try to figure out how to phrase this without like offending somebody. But if I was like so I'll use tobacco, right? Like I can get away with that one. I honestly feel like I was addicted to tobacco. I wasn't before, I'm just using it as an analogy. Like I was addicted to tobacco before, right? And you would think once you stop that if you take a little bit, you'd be like, oh man, I miss it.
Yeah.
And it's the complete opposite for me. Right? It's like the college where you drank too much terrible vodka and you threw it up enough times that now you don't even want to touch the stuff. Like you can't even be around it. And that's how I feel. Like I don't have these cravings that I'm trying to overcome. I don't have these periods of binge eating because I can't control myself because my body's craving carbs. No, my body craves, like what you said, what it needs. And when I'm full and I stop eating.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, that's the thing is if the only binge eating I do would be, say, last night I made a roast and I was like, it's just too good. I'm going to have the rest. Like, and then I'm kind of like, oh, I'm going to be so full tomorrow, right? But I'm like, it's just meat, right? Like, your body's going to figure out a way to use it. So, yeah, no part of me misses like the carbs. And like you said, I can't even like picture myself putting like, say, like a Twinkie to my mouth and just biting it. Like, no part of me wants that. No part of me misses it. Like, I'm good.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so, like, I'm sure you get plenty of this too. It's just the athlete thing that I get all the time, right? All the time. And I get, you'd be better, you'd be bigger, you'd be more shredded, you'd have a better pump if you ate carbs. Like, no, like this is not new for me. Like, my entire 20s was college athletics and bodybuilding, right? Like, I've done the restriction, I've done the clean eating, I've done all of that. And I honestly feel and look better now, 10 years later.
Yeah. And even if you did have a bigger pump, like, who cares, you know? Like, if you're not feeling good on the inside, it's like, why does it matter? And I get frustrated 'cause it's like so many people like attack people like us who eat this way. It's like, why do you care? Like, it's not affecting you in any way. Like, it's my body. If I feel good doing it, then I'm gonna eat the way I want. If it's gonna harm me down the road, well, my body's gonna tell me. But I believe that if you're constantly shoving the carbs into you, eventually you're gonna bonk, right? And that's what you're seeing now is a lot of those high carb athletes. I'm now seeing switch over. They're adding more like beef liver. They're adding more like higher fat, like butter. It's like they're all slowly kind of trickling over, right? And I think, like I said earlier, it's just don't be afraid to experiment. It's like when you're training for a race, you're kind of just doing an experiment. It's the same thing with food. So it's definitely frustrating because I'm sure you get a million comments. It's like, you're going to die, you're going to have a heart attack. It's like, I might, but I could still have a heart attack eating carbs, right? Like, it could happen either way. So, yeah, social media is definitely a blessing and a curse.
The one thing I'm hoping is that younger athletes will start to at least know that it's a thing, right? Because again, as an athlete, like as a collegiate athlete, as someone that took a bunch of exercise physiology classes, took kinesiology, nutrition, A&P, sports medicine, like that was, I had to do my athletic training stuff where, outside of practice, I had to deal with athletes all day. And I literally cannot tell you a single time outside of like maybe a sports nutrition class where we covered it for a little bit. You covered like carb loading before a race, where anybody talked about experimenting with diet, right? Or how, changing foods might help you. If somebody didn't come in and be like, oh man, I'm feeling sick, nobody asked and nobody cared. And, this wasn't that long ago. This was, 2010. And so there's no wonder nobody experiments with it, because nobody by the age of 25 even thinks so.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing that happened to me when I first switched was probably like getting really nauseous at night. Like I would wake up and feel like, kind of on the verge of death. But then eventually it passed, versus like when I was like young, you'd be up throwing up probably because you had, say, McDonald's the day before, right? But you wouldn't know why you felt sick. So it's interesting to see the difference, and I'm never sick now. Like never get a cold. I mean, I still have autoimmune issues, so I'll get flare-ups here and there, but it's just common with that type of disease. But yeah,
it's that's the one that blows me away, is people who, like you said, they'll say you're gonna die of a heart attack. You're gonna, first of all, the studies that they are citing tell me that like my absolute risk of getting any of this stuff goes up by like a couple percentage points, which is so minuscule that it's hilarious that this is what we're talking about. But even then, right, like as you said, you can't tell me that when I do a diet, and like I don't get sick anymore, ever. Like I cannot tell you. I can even like predict if my wife or kids are sick, and I like wake up with a little bit of a sore throat. I'm like, yeah, it's gonna be fine by the end of the day, and then it's totally fine. Like I used to get sick. I used to get a really bad sick like once a year, usually in the winter, and the call out from sick from work days, and then get a couple colds during the year. Nothing. And I'm like, okay, so my body's telling me something, right? Like if my body is not getting sick, I'm doing something right. If I'm not getting the inflammation, I'm doing something right. If I'm not getting the autoimmune, like my eczema is a lot better, my psoriasis is a lot better, acne, all of this stuff improves. I think I'll take the chance on the couple percentage points that I may or may not increase my risk 40 years down.
Yeah, and like I don't want to get into like doctors and stuff, but like every time I go get blood work, I assess it myself after. Like I know I don't have a degree in medicine, but like I've seriously studied it every day for the last like 4 or 5 years. So like you'd think as an athlete your inflammation would be pretty high. My marker's absolutely zero, which is pretty insane. Like, for how much I exercise and train, to have it at zero is like kind of unheard of for a lot of athletes. And the thing about introducing carbs that I wanted to say was, even people that are strict carnivore will be kind of commenting and harping on you, being like, you don't need carbs, right? But like, I would say 85% of the carnivore community also isn't super active. A lot of them are just healing from past illnesses and losing weight. So it's like, you can't really comment on athletes' pages at the same time. But at the same time, it's like, why do you care, right? Like, just focus on yourself, which is the biggest thing that bothers me about any type of diet. It's like, if it works for you, fine, but just worry about yourself.
Well, that hits it on the head, because so like we always get the opposite side of the coin of veganism, right? Unlike veganism, it's not like a moral stance. Right? Like my moral stance is not to not eat plants, right? Like I'm not like, I hold plants in such high regard that I don't want to eat them. No, it's conceptually, right? Carnivore conceptually is prioritizing red meat and trying to eat as much animal product as possible. That's what it is at its core. So people will comment all this time, be like, can you have this? Or can you have that? Like, you can literally eat whatever you want. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, people get on me for using spices. So I'm like, bro, you need to chill. Or I drink coffee. Like, I will drink coffee till the day I die. It's going to happen. And I'm like, the whole idea is to exactly what you said, find what works best for you, for me, that's carnivore, right? But I can still vary whenever I want. Like if I want to go out and eat whatever I want, I can. It's okay, right? Because at the end of the day, it's how you feel and how you feel best. And if you're an athlete and you want to eat some carbs, then do it. Like you said, I would say the demographic of carnivores is an older demographic, just, from pure statistics. And like you said, most of them are not doing this high level stuff. And no, you don't need carbs. But yeah, like you said, if I can get a little bit of a boost and, take away some of the mental wondering, right? Like, am I going to run out of gas? Then there's nothing wrong with introducing a few, like you said, right before a race, during a race, after a race. Like I know there's a couple of the runners, the low carb runner, when he does his, his ultras, his 200 milers, he adds some in. That's okay. Like it's okay to vary from it because the diet is not set in stone like that.
Yeah, and I specifically remember like my ultra, I was using carbs during. The next day, I was like, I don't want to see a single carb, which is fine, right? Because I used it all. And the thing is with athletes, if you are having like carbs, like maybe right now I'm having max like 15 just from like, I use blackstrap molasses a lot just because it has good potassium and stuff. But if I'm having it like either immediately after my workout, it's basically your body, like it's like you didn't even eat it, right? Like your body doesn't even have time to digest it. It's just kind of going right to the recovery part. So yeah, people are like, oh, posting their macros and stuff. It's like I had, not 3 grams of carbs, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, it doesn't matter, like in the end, it's nobody's being like, oh my goodness, like if you like spices, eat spices. It's like it's going in your body, not theirs.
Yeah. So I've last one before we have to wrap it up. I'm actually experimenting. Have you ever heard of D-ribose? So I'm actually experimenting with supplementing with that in my pre-workout. Because and for anybody who doesn't know, D-ribose makes up literally every cell in your body. It's like a main component of RNA. And it's a carbohydrate on the surface, but it doesn't act like carbohydrates when you consume it exogenously. It actually lowers your blood glucose because it doesn't add glucose to your blood, but it does trigger an insulin response. And so my thought is, I'm like, I wonder, it's like 5 grams, like legit taking 5 grams of carbohydrates. I'm like, I wonder if I can, utilize this in a pre-workout where it can help my ATP production, maybe even help with a pump, and see how I feel based on it. And I haven't done it long enough to like give like a feedback on it, but like that's the type of stuff I'm looking for. Like, is that technically carnivore? No. Is it a carb? Technically. Is it the same as eating a Snickers bar? No. So like, I'm all for experimenting around, and if that gives me a little bit of boost and it helps and I feel good doing it, then I will absolutely keep doing it.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, a lot of times people in the carnivore space are like, oh, I cheated and had like a couple of blueberries, and, right away I noticed my anxiety skyrocket. I'm like, honestly, I think your anxiety skyrocketed because you were anxious about eating the food, right? So it's like that brain connection, oh my gosh, I ate something I shouldn't have. Now you're worried about something in the future that's going to happen. So then you think your blood sugar spikes, but you're just anxious. So that's the frustrating part too, is the blood sugar. And like from a couple of blueberries, it's more just you mentally kind of having a panic attack.
Yeah. And I'm all for data and collecting data and checking the glucose, but they're definitely, especially with these CGMs, there definitely can be problems when they're like, oh my gosh, it spiked. Right. Like for fun. So I ate terribly over Christmas, right? Terrible. Like I ate so bad one that I almost got sick. And for fun, I was like, you know what? I'm going to check my blood glucose an hour after eating all of this garbage. And I was straight up like north of 200. Like it was bad.
Yeah.
And part of me was like, and then part of me is like, yeah, what do I expect? I don't eat carbs ever. And then I literally just poured it down my gullet. What am I expecting is going to happen? And then, 3 days later, it was back in the 80s. My fasting is back in the 80s. And I'm like,
it's not the end of the world.
at some point we have to realize that we are flexible. And yeah, like you said, just experiment, like mess around with it a little bit. And if 5 grams of carbs helps you, eat 5 grams. If no grams of carbs help you, eat no grams. If you want to eat an avocado, eat an avocado. It's, what your body responds to best.
Exactly, yeah.
So I very much enjoyed this. Where can people find you, follow along, and when is the Ironman?
Yeah, I'm only on Instagram. It's at Issy Watson, ISSY WATSON, 2 N's. I would like to kind of do some YouTube and TikTok in the future. And my Ironman, it was actually supposed to be end of September, but it's probably going to be pushed back just because of my foot. So I'm hoping to do it early next year. But yeah, if you're an athlete looking kind of for some ideas or tips, feel free to follow me or even message me. I'm happy to share some info on how I like to do things. And yeah, it was great talking to you. Finally,
I
nice to talk to
really
you in
appreciate
person.
you being on. Yeah, I know, right?
Somewhat in person.
Somewhat, right? I'm still amazed at the Guinness World Record. That's freaking awesome. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Go give Issy a follow. Check out doing athlete stuff on Carnivore because it is possible. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.